Welcome to This Bit's Brilliant. I'm Simon Q. Elliott.
And I'm Paul Ging. We make this podcast because life's too short for bad books. So what do you got for us this time, Si?
I've got Harold Larwood by Duncan Hamilton. It says, the authorised biography of the world's fastest bowler. So, fast bowlers are, as far as I'm concerned, the best things in cricket. Even if by accident, most top cricketers could hit a six. Barely 10 people ever have been able to bowl at 100 miles an hour. Larwood was one of them. I've been there for when a couple of properly quick fast bowlers, Brett Lee, Alan Donald, a couple of the West Indies cricketers back in the day, Courtney Walsh and Curtly Ambrose, have been going at it, and they bring a unique buzz to a cricket ground. When a fast bowler is properly going at the batsman, it is incredible. It's the best thing in cricket, one of the best things in sport. And, you know, Larwood was by reputation fastest bowler ever, which we'll, chat about later. What you've got to remember is that the 1932 Bodyline Ashes series was the world's fastest bowler against the world's best batsman, Don Bradman. That's what it was set up as. That's why England bowled Bodyline, was to get at Bradman to stop him scoring so many runs, because he'd been brilliant in the series before. Harold Larwood didn't like Bradman much, but then the interesting thing about that is, a lot of the Australian team didn't like Bradman much. It's a classic. If you look at the sort of modern era cricketers, like Kevin Peterson, who played for England, I'm not sure a lot of the England team loved him, but they loved his runs. They loved what he did, but they didn't necessarily love him. And I think it's also important to remember that the Ashes is one of those unique sporting events that is part of a sort of long continuum of events, but is also in and of itself a moment, an Ashes series. There's one coming up, and that will be all about what happens. But there will be the history that goes with it. We're talking about a series that happened nearly 100 years ago, and we're about to go into another Ashes series, and, Bodyline will pop up. Bodyline was a kind of bowling where bowlers basically aimed at batsman's body in order to try and get them to fend off the ball and pop up a little catch.
Yeah, you'll have to explain to the non-cricket brains like me, but my understanding of Bodyline is that basically the intention was to bowl the ball at the batsman's body, hoping that he would then try and protect himself, hoping that one of the fielders will catch it. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's right. It was bowled at the batsman, not the stumps, looking for a catch from lots of fielders close in on the leg side. And it did mean the rules of cricket were changed. The easiest way to explain the leg side and the offside to non-cricket fans is look it up.
Yeah. We'll be here all week.
It became really controversial because a couple of the Aussie batsmen got hit and hurt. One of the most amazing things about the book is the way in which Larwood was like the instrument of Bodyline. Douglas Jardine, the captain, was always painted as the villain, but I don't think he was, not quite as much as people see anyway. But Larwood was the instrument of Bodyline, and he just did what his captain asked him. But he was the one who ultimately paid quite a heavy price for it. Jardine didn't abandon him, but the cricket authorities basically did and wanted him to apologise, which he never would because he just did what he was asked. And he had an unhappy life for quite a few years beyond it because of the way he was treated by the MCC, who ran cricket at the time. But actually, to be fair to them, it was the Aussies that looked after him in the end. Despite what he'd done to them, it was the Aussies that looked after him. So we'll get to loads of that, but it's a fantastic book. I loved it. We'll be honest, this is the second or third go we've had at this doing this book, and it's because it's got so much going on in it. It's so full of characters and controversy. At one stage during the Bodyline series, the Aussie cricket authorities telegrammed the English cricket authorities, the MCC, the Marylebone Cricket Club, and said, this isn't cricket, basically. The MCC didn't take that very well and just tried to swat them aside. But the Aussie PM had to get involved and tell the Aussie cricket authorities to stop complaining, because he thought that a controversy between the two countries threatened Australia's trade with Britain, and they couldn't afford it. So if you've got a cricket series where the Aussie PM has become involved, that sort of speaks to how controversial the moment was. And Duncan Hamilton captures it perfectly in this book. He tells it in a really it's not a chronological tale, which possibly is the reason I've struggled to kind of talk about it in the show and why we've had a couple of goes at recording this show. But he tells it in a brilliant way. He talks to everyone who was involved, who he could. He talks in the book about how he had a chance to meet Larwood once, but kind of bottled out of it. He was almost too afraid to meet him. And then he never got the chance again after that because Larwood passed on. It's a fantastic book about an amazing character who was a 14-year-old minor and then got called up from the pit to go and play for Nottinghamshire, and then became the world's fastest bowler. The fastest ever recorded ball was by a guy called Shoaib Akhtar for Pakistan, and that was over 100 miles an hour. But it's impossible to tell whether Harold Larwood was the fastest bowler ever, because the film that exists of him bowling is grainy. It might not have been his fastest session.
I'm interested to hear you say that, though, because now with the sort of computer technology, could they not get it? And I remember seeing recently this strange bit of film you may have seen. It's been around forever with like conspiracy theorists of what some people think is a Sasquatch and what some people think is a man in a monkey suit somewhere in Canada in about 1967.
I'm going man in monkey suit, but okay.
Me too. And the fact that they've analysed it and said, oh, there were very strange things about its gait and do this, and it's extremely wobbly and at great distance. And I'm just wondering, with the technology we've got now, could you not put Larwood film in and with the caveat that it's not his fastest session and kind of work out what's going on?
Page 8 of this book, Hamilton sort of goes to that line of, was he the fastest ever bowler? Did he bowl at 100 miles an hour? And he says, Larwood's bowling was electronically timed in an experiment at the White City at over 100 mph. Larwood said, I can't shout about the accuracy of any of them. There were umpires who'd seen me bowl and everyone else up until the 1970s. They said I was a yard or two faster. That's good enough for me. We can only speculate about the true figure. There isn't sufficient film of Larwood to use Hawkeye's sophisticated gadgetry and definitively calculate his exact speed, but it was taken for granted by the poor souls facing him that the ball would fly at them between 95 and 100 miles per hour. And I think that's the heart of it, is you kind of have to, it's those old guys who were around in the days of black and white. We can't tell how good they were. We can't tell how fast the ball was. We can't tell a lot of things because the film is so poor. I've seen the film of Larwood bowling in the Bodyline Ashes, and yeah, it's just, there's not enough of it. It doesn't. The honest truth is, it doesn't look that fast. But you and I work in TV, and we know when you use archive, it skips frames. It's they use different frame rates, so you can't always tell what frame rate stuff was recorded at, and that really matters if you're going to work out speed.
Absolutely.
So I think that thing of witnesses who saw him, and I mean the great Australian fast bowler that was said to be over 100 miles an hour is a guy called Jeff Thompson. And if an umpire has seen both Larwood and Thompson bowl and reckons Larwood was faster, we kind of have to take that. There's always that thing of whether you can only ever be the best or fastest of your time. Saying he's the fastest bowler ever, fine, he might be, but he also might not be. What's important about the Bodyline series, the reason it was so controversial is that England and their captain, Douglas Jardine, set out to stop Don Bradman scoring loads of runs. Now, Don Bradman is, by all accounts, the greatest batsman ever. He's got the highest average. He averaged 99 point something or other, very close to 100.
99.94, I believe.
Very good. Well done, you. I forgot that as I was coming up to it. Douglas Jardine, who's obviously painted as the villain, especially by the Aussies of the Bodyline series.
And by the TV series, which we'll come to in a minute.
Absolutely. The TV series, which is awfully one-eyed and Australian. But no, Jardine got given the captaincy, and one of the things he set out to do was to stop Bradman scoring lots of runs, because in the 1930 series in England, Bradman had scored 974 runs. That's just incredible. That makes him amazing. And Jardine set out to get Bradman, to stop Bradman scoring, because he figured if you can stop Bradman, you can stop Australia. And the thing to remember is, as a tactic, Bodyline worked. England won that series 4-1. Bradman averaged a lot less than his normal average. They stopped Bradman. He got 300. I've written it down. I shall look it up here. It's somewhere down here. So in the 1930 Ashes, he'd got 974 runs. And in the Bodyline series, Bradman got 396 runs. Now, if England in the next series had a couple of batsmen who got 396 runs, we'd be right in the hunt. That's good. That's fantastic. But by Bradman's standards, it had brought him down. So Bodyline worked. Bodyline already existed and was an existing tactic, more commonly known as leg theory. But the Aussies, one of the Aussie papers called it Bodyline, and that's where the name came from.
So this had been tried before. People had tried to do this to put somebody earlier than Bradman off his game.
It wasn't necessarily Bradman that they tried it to, but this kind of tactic had been tried before. It wasn't that new. It was just what you really needed was a bowler as quick as Larwood to make it work, and as we've discussed, there have maybe been 10 of them in the history of cricket. So, they don't fall off trees. Time for a word from the book sponsoring us this time. And The Sun Shines Now by Adrian Tempany is the most important book about modern football he's ever read, according to David Peace, the author of The Damned United. Frank Cottrell Boyce called it brilliantly written, bold, important, honest and gripping. Search for The Sun Shines Now by Adrian Tempany. This episode is also sponsored by King's Gold, the heart-stopping thriller from Simon Q. Elliott. Two of Captain Tom North's soldiers try to kill him. Journalist Henry North is shoved in front of a speeding van. The brothers need to find out who's trying to kill them and why before the murderers succeed. 800 years ago, England's crown jewels were stolen. There's still a price to pay. King's Gold by Simon Q. Elliott. Search for it on Amazon.
Have you read King's Gold, have you?
Yeah, I've spent quite a lot of time with King's Gold.
That's good.
Quite a lot of time. It's a brilliant book by an amazing guy. But anyway, Jardine's always been painted as the villain of Bodyline, especially by the Aussies. To be honest, until I read this book, I was happy to have him as the villain of Bodyline. But I think that's actually slightly unfair, and Larwood wouldn't have a word said against him. Larwood suffered after this series. I think that's one of the important things to say. There was so much criticism and controversy. When Jardine was appointed, it's what Hamilton says in the book.
Yeah.
Jardine knew his tactics against Bradman needed to be unconventional to succeed. And then, as Sherlock Holmes often did, he experienced his eureka moment. It came after he'd watched a short clip of film of Bradman, no more than a couple of minutes long, batting against Larwood at the Oval in 1930, so that's the series before Bodyline. Larwood bowls him a short ball, and Bradman flinched and backed to the leg side to fend off Larwood, who struck him on the chest. Bradman dropped his bat, stood bent almost double with his gloved hands resting on the rolls of his pads. "I've got it," said Jardine. "He's yellow." He's done then what people do all the time now. Cricket's almost over-analysed now so that they find out batsmen's weaknesses, where they get out, where they score all the time. There's 1,000,001 stats and analysis of all the batsmen who play now. So actually looking in this way at that time probably was quite unusual, because you wouldn't have had tons of film of cricket before then.
Of course.
And he says of Jardine, he didn't inspire an easy affection. He was unfairly labelled as high-minded and overbearing, and often came across, especially to Australians, as a man made up entirely of sharp edges, conceited, seldom conciliatory, and with a tongue like the lash of a bullwhip. Larwood thought differently. He wasn't a snob, he said, and he had a very dry sense of humour. With some of the things he said, you couldn't tell if he was joking or not. Some people just took him the wrong way, but I don't pretend that he was an easy man to understand. Like others, I was inclined to be suspicious of him at first, but I soon found he was a good man with a good heart. Now, there's one other brilliant line, because the trouble is with this particular show is we're going to talk a lot about Bodyline and cricket in the Ashes, and not really about what a good writer Duncan Hamilton is. But there's a great line that he's got. Once it all kicks off, Jardine comes in for a lot of criticism. And Hamilton says, Jardine wasn't worried about bad publicity. Criticism bounced off him like rain off a roof. And I just think that's a great line.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's the trouble. That's how he's portrayed. And the truth of it is, the real villains of Bodyline, there's a guy called Pelham Warner who'd played for England 20 or 30 or 40 years before, and he was a proper old school snob, and he was the tour manager, and he was deeply, I think it's fair to say he was actually cowardly about it.
Right.
And as soon as the controversy kicked off, having been fully on board with Bodyline, he backed away, blamed Jardine, didn't really blame Larwood, but kind of didn't do him any favours. What you've got to remember is at this time, when England toured, they toured under the banner of the Marylebone Cricket Club, the guys who run Lords, not as England. Now they tour under the England and Wales Cricket Board, but the MCC were kind of decided what was fair in cricket and ran the England team for years and years and years.
They literally decided what was and what wasn't cricket.
Exactly. This series, the 1932 Bodyline Ashes, wasn't immediately controversial. England started, used the tactic early on, but it wasn't that controversial until actually the third test.
Why is that? Is that because they weren't winning and then they started complaining more, or why is that?
Basically, it was 1-1 by the time they got to that test.
Right.
But there might have been rumblings, but no one had been hit. No one had been really badly hurt. And then what happened in the third test in Sydney is that a guy called Bill Woodfull got hit, who was the Aussie captain. Part of the problem was how it was handled by Pelham Warner, who didn't handle it well. He was one of those patrician old guys who thought a man's handshake and apology could sort anything out, and that's Hamilton's line on him. And, the Aussie captain had just been smacked around by Larwood and wasn't really in the mood to hear a gentlemanly apology. Larwood hit Bill Woodfull, but actually he wasn't bowling Bodyline at the time.
Right.
There's a set moment when Bodyline came into action. It's when all the fielders, went into the right place, and then you start bowling this deliberate line at the body. If you look at the film of when Bill Woodfull got hit, Larwood wasn't bowling Bodyline. It was just one that reared up and hit him.
That's really interesting. But in the context of the controversy, everyone threw their toys out of the pram, I suppose.
Exactly. So the ball took Woodfull near the heart and tore the skin. He dropped his bat and pressed both of his gloved hands against his chest, half stooping as if he'd taken a bullet. He unbuttoned his shirt to inspect the damage. The mark was already red, like a port wine stain. The booing lasted for 3 minutes.
So you see, like he'd been shot. So maybe that TV series wasn't too over the top after all.
No, I'm sorry, but I am not giving a terribly one-eyed Aussie TV series any kind of credit. I'm just not.
I haven't tried to look it up on YouTube or anything. My memory of it was these brave Aussie cricketers getting their bones and everything broken and being carried off after the dastardly tactics of having the ball basically thrown at them. Or, the scene from Platoon of people falling over in slow motion. It was a bit like brave Aussie cricketers being brought down with Hugo Weaving as Jardine. Now, often associated with these sort of duplicitous and sort of villainous characters. Douglas
Jardine as what was his name? Was it Agent Smith in The Matrix? I can see Douglas Jardine as Agent Smith. But this is the thing about the Aussies. Some of my best friends are Australian. I'm not sure they are, but anyway. But when it comes to sport, I'm one of the guys. There was a controversy, I think it was about 2013, something like that, maybe 2009, where Ricky Ponting, the Aussie captain, got booed every time he came out. I was one of the ones booing him. I was absolutely one of the ones booing him. And it's because sport in that way is kind of like pantomime.
Yeah.
In the same way that England and, Jardine were the sort of pantomime, although it was a bit stronger, were the pantomime villains of Bodyline. As far as I'm concerned, every time the Aussies come over here, they're the pantomime villains.
Yeah.
And it's fine. And as long as it doesn't go outside the ground or into anything more confrontational, booing the captain of Australia or the Aussies booing the captain of England, it's fine.
It's a
That's
bit
how
like,
it should be.
Get a returning player who's had a transfer and they're getting booed when they come back. I can remember Peter Beardsley in his first match back at Newcastle for Liverpool. Every time he touched the ball, he was booed. But I mean, Newcastle at the time were a bit of a, let's not discuss where they are now, but certainly a bit of a Mickey Mouse club at the time. And you think, well, do you want to stay here and I'll wear the short leg, or do you want to try and do something? And he left, and I had no problem with it. I was not booing him. David Ginola similarly left Newcastle to go to Spurs. He didn't even want to, and when he came back, he was getting booed. It was just I'm sure there's definitely other cases where I have. You see, I only remember the occasions where I didn't boo. So
Yeah,
there were plenty of occasions where I did boo people. I'm sure I booed Andy Cole when he came back with Manchester United, for example. So it is, yes, as you say, panto.
I admire the way you're your own character reference, mate. I really do.
Marking my own homework as usual.
Yeah. No, I like that. So that's when it became really controversial, is when Bill Woodfull got hit. And this is what happened after that incident. What appalled Woodfull and critically dictated his own response to events over the next 48 hours was the reaction to his discomfort. Jardine folded his arms, walked past the groggy Woodfull and slapped Larwood on the back. Well bowled, Harold, he said loudly. The stagey congratulations were no more than base psychology, designed not so much to heap more misery on Woodfull, but to unnerve Bradman, who was at the non-striker's end and so heard what Jardine said. As Larwood ran up to bowl his next ball at Woodfull, Jardine stopped him theatrically in mid-stride for exactly the same reason. He clapped his hands, gestured to the fielders to move into the leg side trap or for the bodyline fielding sort of settings. That's what I'm saying. It wasn't bodyline when he hit Woodfull. So Jardine moves them into the right position and then waved Larwood towards him like a film director arranging his actors on set. The only thing he didn't do was shout action. Larwood promptly sent the bat spinning out of Woodfull's hands again. Jardine knew and didn't care that he would provoke both Woodfull and Bradman, who made a meagre 8 runs before Larwood claimed him. So it's stagey, it's pantomime.
Yeah.
It's exactly that stuff we're talking about. So, you can say that Jardine was villainous in the moment, but it's really funny, actually. The Aussies always sort of credit, after they'd gone through a tough time in the 80s when Botham was in his pomp, they credit Alan Border and then Steve Waugh with being these real steely-eyed tough guys who wouldn't take any nonsense and, absolutely made sure that their team were hard as nails and played as tough as possible and gave England nothing. And the Aussies laud them as super tough guys, who did what was needed. Jardine did what was needed.
Yeah. There isn't that reciprocal acknowledgement of that right, we need to do something to deal with these exceptional players. Here's what we're going to do.
Absolutely.
So where does it go from here? How did it develop from this dark end of part 1 moment?
Well, the trouble is the start to the next part was pretty dark as well. A guy called Bert Oldfield was hit in one of the later Test matches, and this is where the crowd and the anger and the Aussie press have really stoked the local crowds. And Oldfield gets hit, and Hamilton says, as Oldfield went down under the force of the blow, the oval swelled with anger, and that anger rolled down and across the pitch as a visceral, shrieking roar that frightened Larwood. The atmosphere turned sulphurous. Crimson faces with eyes on stalks like cartoon characters came to the fence and seemed to press against Larwood's own face. Even though he was more than 30 yards away from most of them, he could feel the crowd's loathing prickling his skin.
Was this written by the director of the Bodyline TV series then?
Well, maybe. I think it's beautiful writing.
It is.
I think Hamilton
It's lovely.
Brilliant job.
You can really sense the anger, can't you?
Exactly. These crowds were furious.
Yeah.
But the police deployed mounted troopers to ensure order. Contemporary reports talked about the threat of riot and physical violence. And all his life, Larwood was convinced that view was valid. On the field, he prayed quietly to himself that it wouldn't happen. One of the things about Larwood was that he wasn't anyone's image of a fast bowler. People's image of a fast bowler is some 6'6" menace with a big villainous handlebar moustache who's going to try and knock someone's block off and says he's going to. And Larwood was actually 5'8", 5'9", quite slight in his build.
But even when he started, I don't know how true this is, but they were saying that when he started playing, he was like 5'4", 5'5", and the reports say that he grew. I'm not sure how true that can be.
Like most cricketers of the time, Larwood came up through club cricket in Nottinghamshire, and this is the description of him. He looked more like a waif from the pages of a Dickens novel than a fast bowler. He was 19, less than 5'4" tall, and so pitifully skinny that a thick brown leather belt held up his trousers. This is talking about when he goes for his trial with Nottinghamshire. Now, bear in mind, Larwood had been down the pits since he was 14, and he was desperate to get out of it. When he'd walked over to the nets, Larwood, nearly a foot shorter than the other players, had been hidden from view. As he carefully marked out his extravagant 20-pace run and tried to suppress his butterfly nerves, he heard one of the committee say, "He'll never run that far, let alone bowl when he gets there." And then it's the classic thing of, then he bowls and all the committee men sort of go, oh, looks like we've got one here. But I'll also read you a bit about when he was down the pit. At 14, he'd become a pit pony boy, carrying an oil light and driving the pony in a train of long, high-sided tubs, each holding 100 weight of coal. The train ran on unreliable, slippery rails, and the grooved metal wheels of the heavy tubs frequently bounced free of the track. Once, a cart cut off a man's arm. The man, an experienced miner, was oiling the wheel drum but hadn't put the brake on. "I heard an awful shout and then a scream," said Larwood. "When I turned round, his arm had come clean off." So Larwood's witnessed this as a teenager. And there's a line in here about how tight Nottinghamshire are. Like, Larwood was earning 32 shillings a week down the mine, and Nottinghamshire only offered him 32 shillings a week. They basically, matched his wages.
Yeah, I heard that his father was furious that he didn't ask for more, but he was so desperate, wasn't he, to get out?
But then I think if you've seen a man's arm cut off doing the job that you're doing, you'd probably I'd have taken less than it. Yeah, that's what you're offering. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Larwood's story is complex and challenging, and he was basically betrayed by his own country. I think England's cricket authorities, I think guys like Pelham Warner did him the dirty. They deserted him. He got injured not long after, and they just didn't look after him. And because it was those days where cricket was divided into gentlemen and players, where you had non-professionals and professionals like Larwood, and the non-professionals ran the game, and it was play up and play the game kind of that sort of snobby rubbish. And Larwood was treated as not much more than a stock animal, and once he was done, and England didn't look after him. After he'd finished cricket, he tried to run like a vegetable business, he tried to run a shop, and actually it was the Aussies, some of the guys he'd played against, who came and found him and said, "Come to Australia." And like, Larwood was really worried about it. He said, "But they hate me there," because he remembered when the crowd had been baying for his blood during the Bodyline series. And actually, as far as I can tell, and Hamilton goes into it and talks to his family, Larwood had a decent life in Australia and ended up okay. Yeah, Larwood's story is very much a kind of mid-20th century story of dealing with Britain's class system at its worst, being an amazing talent, and then having to find a way to live a happy life. And it seems like he did, and Duncan Hamilton does a brilliant job of telling his story, the story of the Bodyline Ashes, all of it, and it's a great book.
Brilliant. Well, you managed to bring that alive for someone who doesn't know an awful lot about cricket, so that's good. Thanks very much, Si.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.